Well, that's Father Nathaniel coming to you through your Sunday homily for the 31st Sunday in Ordinary Time. This weekend we hear the gospel about Zacchaeus. And it was a reminder of a little video saw on YouTube once, and that was of a homeless man. A news program had decided to kind of test the homeless and prove supposedly that, that all they do sometimes is buy alcohol when you give them a donation or something like that. So they gave the guy on the street corner $100 and then followed him. And sure enough, he went to an alcohol store and came out with two big bags. And following him, of course, they thought it was going to be, a bunch of vodka and gin and whiskey, etc. But what happened was he went to a park and pulled out sandwiches that he had bought for the other homeless in the area. And the interviewer, the guy who was with the cameraman, he went over and apologized to the guy, and he didn't know that he had been followed. But the television guy then gave him another $100 and just thanked him and said he'd pray for him. And there was a lot of tears and a little hug, and it turned out the guy was a vet and just so generous, so giving away of what little he had. Very beautiful example. And it reminds me, I'm standing here kind of in a wooded environment right now, trees all around me. And the story we hear about this weekend is Zacchaeus, and he goes and he climbs a tree. And he goes up, and because he can't see Jesus, he's a small little guy. A couple, you can imagine, 4.5 foot, 5 foot guy surrounded by hundreds of people from Jericho who are crowding Jesus, and they want to see Jesus, and he can't see them. And frankly, they don't care about him because he's a tax collector and a chief tax collector. He's a very rich guy. And the image tax collectors had among the Jews was, of course, very negative because they worked for the Roman government and were known to swindle and to extort people for more money than they should have been paying for taxes. So this guy was not liked. And so he climbs this tree called a sycamore tree, and that tree means foolishness. Sycamore tree and the foolish tree. And we're going to come back to that in a second. But so he climbs the tree, and Jesus comes along, and you can just imagine the scene. Zacchaeus is kind of huddled foolishly up in the tree, looking like a sight to behold for sure. And Jesus actually stops crowds of people around him, and he looks up and he says, "Zacchaeus, come on down. I want to stay in your house today." And imagine the surprise that this outcast felt that Jesus looked up at him and he smiled and he called him by name. I mean, he actually knew his name. I mean, imagine this person comes along and knows your name, and you don't know, you've never met the person before, and Jesus knows him, smiles and says, "Come on down, I'm coming to your house today." What an amazing moment, unforgettable, that marked Zacchaeus' life, and it certainly marked the disciples' life because they wrote it down in the gospel as a key moment in the history of salvation. So Jesus goes to his house, and while they're eating and drinking and spending time with Zacchaeus, people are grumbling, and they say, "This guy went to a sinner's house." And at that, Zacchaeus turns to the Lord and says, "Lord," I mean, you imagine, he's been moved to the heart. He sees all of a sudden that his money, his influence, his power, his riches, they don't mean anything really. I mean, that they're a stewardship, and that everything is second to Jesus. And he says, "I'm going to give half of this, Lord, to the poor, and anyone I've extorted, I will give back fourfold." So, and Jesus says, salvation has come to this guy today, come to this house today. What an amazing example that should really move each one of us. Because Jesus today reminds us that the foolishness of the gospel, the tree of foolishness that he himself climbs on the cross, is this tree of self-giving for the other and putting God first and willing to give everything in this life away for his sake, for the sake of loving God and loving neighbor. And Jesus himself does that on the cross. Jesus himself empowers us to do the same. Jesus is not just a nice example, but he empowers human beings, you and me, his children, God's children, to be like him, to climb the tree of foolishness where we are on display for the world, in a sense, to be laughed at, where instead of embracing and living for money, we give it away, where we instead of squandering our time on ourselves always and investing always in ourselves and what we would pursue, we invest in God and serving neighbor. Instead of building ourselves up to try to appear number one and be all powerful and lord it over other people, we humble ourselves and serve others. And that is the way of the Lord. That is the foolishness of the gospel. But it's in that foolishness that we're strong, that we are exalted by the Lord to be his sons and daughters, and we live consistent with that. And that's what Jesus teaches us this weekend, that he himself climbed that tree of foolishness, and he now calls you and me to do the same. He calls you by name. Peter, James, Susan, Tommy, Jennifer, etc. Calls you by name and says, come on, join me on this tree of foolishness, and then I'm going to come to your house. And so in doing so, then we will be inspired by the Lord to also give up what we have. And I would encourage us, each one, to really go deep in our hearts and ask God sincerely, Lord, what are you asking me to give away? Am I giving away, if you will, my wealth? Am I giving away the wealth of my money? Am I giving away the wealth of my time? Am I giving away the wealth of my ability to love and serve others? Am I giving away my selfishness and my pride and my attachment to sensual pleasures that, that are maybe consuming me? And the Lord will give you strength to do whatever he's asking you. And it is also a reminder, by the way, in this gospel, that the church is for all people. And the church, yes, has a special preferential option for the poor, as we say, both the poor of spirit and the poor physically. But the poor of spirit oftentimes are the physically rich financially and influential in the world. And so our Lord reminds us today that he came for everybody. And so we have to pray for our brothers and sisters who have been entrusted with much physically, and invite them to consider Christ and to be close to Christ. And we as a church also have to make sure that we welcome them and that we serve them also, and make sure to outreach to them and make them feel loved and included, not just because they can make a nice donation perhaps to the church or help with the capital campaign, or because they can open up doors for the evangelization of peoples, but above all because they too are sons of God, like Jesus says to Zacchaeus. This man too is a son of God, and so we should welcome them, our brothers and sisters who have been entrusted with much, to in the open body of the church, and make sure that they are also cared for and shown love and helped in their journey too. May God bless you this Sunday, and may you, like Zacchaeus, hear yourself called by the Lord, that you may also imitate him in being generous with the wealth, whatever that might be, that the Lord has entrusted with you. God bless you.